Hi everyone, I'm Julie Kirk, NACAC's Government Relations Manager, and we are coming to you live today from NACAC headquarters here in Arlington, Virginia. Welcome. Today we'll be talking about NACAC's advocacy efforts, our Government Relations Committee, and ways for you to get involved in those efforts. So we'll be joined today by Jim Fowler, NACAC's Government Relations Committee Chair and Vice President for Enrollment Management at Salve Regina University. So we'll wait for just a second while Jim tunes in with us. And while we're waiting for him, just a couple updates for you all. On February 13th at noon, make sure to mark your calendars, same time, same place, here on Facebook Live. We'll be hosting another question and answer session with Allison Tom, who is a member of our Government Relations Committee. So make sure to mark your calendars for that. Another thing that we have coming up that you all can look forward to is a NACAC Reads discussion about Michelle Obama's memoir, Becoming. I'm sure many of you all have heard some of the excitement around that book, and hopefully many of you have read it. If not, you have until March 19th to get your reading in. We'll be hosting that NACAC Reads discussion. Again, that's March 19th at 9 p.m., and that takes place on Twitter. So we're still waiting for Jim, so I'll just keep the updates coming. Plenty of stuff going on here in NACAC that you all can mark your calendars for. Our next Facebook Live, I mentioned that we have one coming up on February 13th. However, we have another one before that that's going to take place on January 31st. And that will take place also at noon Eastern Standard Time, and that will be with Lindsay Addington, who is our Director of Global Engagement here at NACAC. She'll be talking a little bit about international student recruitment and sort of our global engagement efforts here at NACAC. So it looks like Jim is just about to tune in, so we'll be excited to dive into our question and answers with him. So here's Jim. Welcome.
Hi, Julie. Sorry, I got confused by technology. I'm old.
No problem. We get it. We're glad that you were able to join us. Well, thanks again, Jim, for joining us, and thanks to all the viewers that are here with us. Make sure throughout the question and answer that you all are sharing your questions that you have for Jim. He will make sure to answer those at the end of the broadcast. But we have some questions of our own for Jim, so we'll just dive right in if that's cool with you.
Bring it on.
Awesome. All right.
And if I'm moving my hands, I apologize. It is a balmy 11 degrees here in Newport, Rhode Island, and we have a gas outage on Aquidneck Island. So we are dealing with a very interesting day here in higher education world.
Wow. Never a dull day, that's for sure. I think we're probably up to about 16 degrees here in Arlington, so we just barely have you beat.
I think that's like a national emergency when it's cold down.
All right, Jim. So our first question for you is if you could just start by kind of telling us a little bit about yourself and your background in admissions, and how that background or experience led to an interest in government relations and advocacy work.
Sure. Well, I mean, I've always kind of been interested in politics. I can remember back to high school taking my civics class and really loving that, and loving the fact that back in the old days we used to get a copy of Time magazine every week, and that was what we utilized to have sort of discussion on the politics of the day. That really led to me going to college and thinking I was going to major in political science, finding out that political science wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. And so while I moved away from that, I've always stayed apprised of what was going on in the world in terms of legislation and in terms of Congress. And so when I went to graduate school, I had one of the pieces that my professor in one of my classes had us read was Savage Inequalities by Kozel, which I highly recommend if people haven't read, especially in this day and age. They should definitely read Kozel to have a real true understanding of some of the challenges that face education in the United States. And that really opened my eyes to the fact that it really isn't enough to just stay apprised of things and to have conversations about things, but it's important that we have a voice in this process. And so as I've progressed throughout the course of my career, as I've seen institutions, large and small, public, private, open enrollment to the most selective, you look at the breadth and depth of education in the US and you realize that everybody has their share of challenges, and many of those challenges need to be addressed through legislative means. And so if we are not voices in that process, then we are allowing people that may not have knowledge of what it is we do, why we do it, how we do it, and why things are as they are, to make decisions that impact students when we're the primary advocate for students. We're the ones who know what they need and the complexities and the broad range of needs that students require, and that every student is different and every experience is different and every community is different. And so solving those problems are not simple solutions. And so they require those of us with insight into those complexities to be part of the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I was a political science major myself in college, so definitely can relate to you there. I somehow managed to stick it out, but can understand how your path might have curved a bit. Well, thanks so much for that answer, Jim. For those of you who maybe just are joining us, again, welcome. Make sure to hop in the comments on the Facebook Live here and leave your answers, or your questions rather, for Jim. We'll make sure to answer those at the end of the broadcast. So Jim, our next question for you is, can you tell us more about the role of the Government Relations Committee, or as we like to call it for short, GRAC, and sort of your responsibilities, your role as chair of that committee?
Sure. Well, my primary role is to facilitate the discussion topics that are brought to our attention and require legislation to address. Sometimes these topics come from the NACAC board. Sometimes it comes from members of the committee as we hear things. And oftentimes they're really brought to our attention from NACAC members, either contacting the NACAC office saying, hey, this is something that needs to be dealt with, or through members of the committee letting us know that these are areas of interest. And when these topics are brought to our attention, there's often a discussion on how NACAC might be involved in addressing them. We have to ask certain questions like, are they of concern to the entire organization, or do they fall in line within the charge and mission of the organization? And if so, how would we recommend the organization address it? And in this way, we kind of serve as an advisory committee for the NACAC board and the work that they do. And we're also fortunate as an association to have a legislative liaison and lobbyist named Mike Rose, who I hope everyone has an opportunity to meet. He's a great guy, and he really brings a wealth of knowledge of governance and process, and is really critical to our association's work, and in many ways really guides a lot of what we do from a more professional perspective, recognizing that those of us that are members of the committee are not professional political operatives, and so to have that expertise and that advice, it becomes very important to the work we do.
Absolutely. Mike is my supervisor, so if he's tuning in, I can also confirm that he is a great guy. So our next question for you, Jim. So in the spirit of the new year, what are some goals that you have as chair this upcoming year? And sort of related, with the new session of Congress beginning, what do you anticipate will be some of NACAC's advocacy priorities in the coming year with the coming Congress?
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the most important goals that we've identified as a committee this year is that we want to establish greater alignment with the affiliate committees. So much of politics is local, and so we recognize that many of our members maybe don't have interest or the resources to come to DC and may feel as if they're being left out of the discussions as a result. And we want to broaden the scope of involvement of NACAC and affiliate members and voicing our ideals to decision makers. So we are advocating for the resources and tools required to improve educational pathways for students and the students that our members serve. Interestingly enough, at the federal level, a divided Congress may work to our advantage as an association. The Higher Education Reauthorization Act has been stalled for a number of years now, and so it's possible that over the next 12 months, there might be an opportunity for bipartisan engagement to finally do a new Higher Ed Reauthorization Act. And so I think this is going to be a real big focus of the legislative conference in March. There's also a number of other really big issues that remain on the table and have been on the table for a while. Certainly school safety is a huge issue that we've addressed as an association over the last year and a half and continue to. Issues of support for undocumented students, which certainly is a major focus right now and has led to our wonderful government shutdown, which hopefully will be resolved sooner than later, because I'm sure many of us have friends, family, et cetera, that are affected by that. We know that financial aid is always a concern, and the need for more financial aid and more support. The issues related to international student enrollment, access to visas, the entire process of enrolling students, and whether or not we're going to be a welcoming country for international student enrollment, that I think many of us agree is a vital part of our educational fabric. I think another big issue that is being brought to the fore, particularly over the last year, I would encourage members, if you haven't read Sarah Goldrick-Rob's most recent book about the issues related to students and finance and education, and also the issues related to what is the true cost of education for many families, that it goes beyond just tuition or room and board, that there are issues of hunger and homelessness that exist for many of our students, and that has been somewhat ignored by our political establishment, and bringing that conversation to the fore, I think also is a huge priority for us. And I think, the other piece of the equation that's always a fun conversation for the Government Relations Committee is the fact that today's political environment is very different than many of us that have followed politics or been involved in politics for years have seen. And so there is a level of unpredictability that requires us often to address things that we can't predict at this point, that will be part of the conversation in the coming future.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for those thoughts, Jim. So sort of switching gears, well, yes, absolutely, things can be very unpredictable and at times uncertain. We always like to have sort of a hopeful spirit in the name of advocacy. So in that sense, Jim, can you tell us about one of your most memorable advocacy moments or successes that you've experienced while advocating on behalf of NACAC or on behalf of students more generally?
Sure. Well, I mean, for me, it's pretty easy. It was, going to the legislative conference for the first time 5 years ago. I think my experience as a NACAC member and just as a member of U.S. society is that it's probably not unique that, I was often felt that while I was always engaged in trying to make sure that I was educated on what was going on in the political realm, I often found myself thinking, what voice do I have as just sort of a plain old citizen out there in a world where I think many of us look at the political process and say, gosh, if you don't have money, if you don't have influence, if you're not in with a certain ruling group, how do you have a voice in this process? And I think one of the things that I learned from going to the legislative process, to the legislative conference, is that I do have a voice. And not only do I have a voice, I have an important voice because my experiences as a member of the association and in my day-to-day job have allowed me to develop a set of expertise that our congressional representatives don't necessarily have. Many people in Congress come from a variety of different backgrounds. You see a lot of lawyers, you see some business people, but it's not very common, particularly at the federal level, maybe a little bit more common at the local level, to see people with a background in education. And so having an opportunity to, one, have larger discussions about NACAC's priorities and how we as an association can advocate for those priorities, but then having an opportunity to go up on the Hill and have discussions with representatives of my congressional pool was surprising in that they truly wanted to hear what I had to say and were interested and were learning something from what I had to say, that what knowledge I was bringing to the table was clarifying for them, particularly as they were looking at certain bills, at certain priorities that they could then bring to their congressperson and say, here is some data that you may not have had. Here are some experiences that you may not have known about. Here are some stories that you can represent in your conversations that illustrate why change is needed or why certain legislative actions are needed on behalf of students in this in their quest for higher education. Because certainly I think we all agree that we wouldn't be in this if we didn't, that higher education is vital for the development of a strong economy and the development of intelligent and engaged citizens. And if we are not advocating for that, who will? And so that was an eye-opening experience for me, that my voice really does matter, that it does count, and my expertise is important in the conversation, and that I can participate in that conversation and feel as though my participation is worthwhile.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really love that message of, our members are, like you said, the experts on their own experiences as counselors and as those who are working so closely with students. So completely agree that really the experts are the ones that are tuning in live and are otherwise busy working through their day with their students. So thank you so much for that, Jim. So as folks want to sort of give a voice to their story and their expertise, along those lines, can you share with us some opportunities that there are to get involved with NACAC's advocacy efforts?
Well, I mean, first of all, I strongly encourage everyone to get involved and participate in NACAC legislative alerts. If you're not signed up, hopefully there's going to be a link shared later where you can go sign up so you get these legislative alerts. Oftentimes they'll come through by email and say, here's something that NACAC is advocating for, we're having conversations about, and we want to add your voice to that. Our responses to these as a membership really do need to improve. What I've learned through my time in GRAC, both at the affiliate level and at the national level, is how important it is for us to stand up and be counted on a lot of these issues. Members of Congress represent us, and like so many of us, use metrics in our work to do our jobs. So do they. And if 3,000 NACAC members sign up on a legislative action alert, that raises the profile of the conversation. It really sends a message. And if we don't send that message, then that message falls on deaf ears. We are a large, growing organization that can have a collective voice that really is resonant on issues related to students and education. But if we don't use that voice, then the voice really is, we're wasting an opportunity. And part of using that voice is truly individually saying, yes, I am willing to sign on to this legislative action alert, so I'm lending my voice to it. The association going forth and saying this is a priority for the association isn't enough. The way Congress works, they want to be able to say, X number of people in my district said they are in support of this, and X number said that they were against it. And if they can weigh that a significant vocal majority are for a priority that we're for, then that increases the opportunity where we'll see legislation move in the direction that we need it to move to make sure that students are protected. Similarly, I strongly encourage people to get involved with their affiliate GRAC committees. The state of the politics today has many of us really focused on Washington, but so much of what happens that affects students in their day-to-day experience actually happens on the local level, either within our individual communities or within our states. And so it's really important to stress the ability and the necessity of the local affiliate GRAC work to advocate upon our priorities at the local level. And it's a good way to sort of get your foot in the door and start having these conversations in a way that, maybe doesn't require to pick up and go to Washington for a legislative day or a Hill day. That said, I would encourage people to try to attend the legislative conference in DC. It's really an amazing experience. Everyone I've ever talked to that has attended it said that it was really career affirming for them, that they left the conference feeling more confident about their voice in the process, and that they can really truly get out there and make a difference on matters related to advocating for legislation for our students and for our profession. You'll learn so much more how vital the conversation is and how much power you actually do have to express your voice. And now more than ever, I think we as a profession need to do that.
Definitely. Thank you. So that last involvement opportunity that you mentioned, NACAC's Advocacy Meeting, which will take place this year, March 3rd and 4th, here in Washington, D.C. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that event? Who can register and how do they do so if interested?
Yeah. Well, first of all, any NACAC member can register. And so I think sometimes people think, oh, I've got to be a member of my affiliate GRAC committee, or I've got to be on some other leadership post within my affiliate in order to attend. That's not true. Any member can come to DC and participate in the legislative conference. Now, there is limited space, so don't wait too long. I know I need to do my registration. I have not forgotten about it. I'm a procrastinator at heart, but I will get it done. So anybody can participate. And I think what a lot of people don't understand about the event is that there's actually two pieces to it. So there's the legislative conference itself, which takes place on Sunday. And the GRAC committee works closely with NACAC main office to bring in some really wonderful speakers and people that can educate us on what's really happening on the Hill, as well as some education on how a bill becomes a law and things like that. And it's more complicated than we got through Schoolhouse Rock, I can promise you. And so having that insight becomes really important. And then we have a lot of really good discussion about some tough issues and where NACAC should stand on those tough issues. And those conversations are very enlightening, and I think benefit from people with a wide range of opinions willing to express those opinions in an environment that I think is pretty safe and where I think people are really willing to discuss many sides of the issue and help NACAC understand where we as an association stand. And then the second piece is really on Monday, which is Hill Day. And certainly you don't have to go to Hill Day to attend the legislative conference, but if you do attend the legislative conference, I really encourage people to go to Hill Day. And what that is an opportunity for us all to make appointments with our congressional delegations and to go up and either meet with our member or to meet with a member of their staff. I've found the congressional delegations to be very welcoming to us. They want to meet with us. They want to hear from us. And even if you've been to DC before and you've sort of done the touristy thing and gone around and looked at the various buildings, you don't really get a true sense of the way our government works until you have an opportunity to go into these congressional offices and see people milling about and having conversations and lobbying and really advocating. And it's everything from organized groups like NACAC to individuals that are going to express their opinion, and that is really in a lot of ways what separates the American democracy from many others in the world, and we want to protect that. And I think participating in Hill Day is part of protecting that American democracy, is saying we as an informed citizenry have not just a right but an obligation to voice our opinions to our members of Congress and let them know where we stand and encourage them to hopefully make decisions that are in the best interest of our citizenry and our students.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jim. So I believe that the link for registration for the advocacy meeting has been placed in the comments here on the Facebook Live. So for those of you tuning in, we hope to see many of you. Again, that's on March 3rd and 4th here in Washington, D.C. And so we actually have a question here from one of our viewers, and I will also just make a little bit of sort of an amendment and point out that you actually, in fact, don't even have to be a NACAC member to attend the advocacy meeting. So if you are a member of your affiliate but not a member of NACAC, we hope that this event will help you consider becoming a member, but it is not required for you to be a member of NACAC to attend the advocacy meeting. So we hope that won't stray any of you tuning in from registering if you're interested. So Karen has asked us a question about the advocacy meeting in March. They asked, is attendance at the meeting in March required? And is that the only place you can receive training? And I believe that's sort of in relation to if you're interested in being involved with the Government Relations Committee.
Yeah, no, there's no requirement to attend Hill Day to be involved in NACAC legislative, whether you want to be an affiliate at GRAC, whether, you know, at some point in time you'd like to serve on national GRAC. It's nice if you can attend, but we certainly cannot require, nor would we require people to attend that conference. You know, and if you want to participate, you know, again, I strongly encourage you, start at your affiliate level, contact your affiliate GRAC chair. Chances are they're going to be very welcoming. GRAC committees tend to be sort of a come one, come all experience because the more voices, then the more weight that we can provide. And every affiliate handles things a little bit differently. I know here in New England, you know, we're an affiliate trying to manage 5 different states. There's a lot of activity, regular monthly conference calls where we have some discussions about priorities. We try to create Hill Days in each of the individual states so we can lobby at the local level. So there's certainly more than one way to get involved, and we never want to discourage anyone from being involved. And certainly if there are issues that you have that you're concerned about, let us know. You can contact me, you can contact the NACAC office, you can contact Mike Rose, any member of the National Committee. We want to hear what people's concerns are and the areas that people think that we should be focusing our efforts and to be able to add those to our discussions.
Absolutely. Yeah, as you mentioned, a number of our states and affiliates host sort of similarly to as we do here in DC, host a Hill Day at the state level. So if you're tuning in and you're not sure if your state has one of those events, or you just want to know when it is, like Jim said, feel free to reach out to us here at NACAC headquarters or any of the members of the committee, and we'll be happy to connect you with your GRAC leaders at the state level to let you know if your state has a Hill Day and when that is. I know many of those are coming up over the next 1 to 2 months, so we're looking forward to hearing from our affiliate leaders on how those events go. So our next question from Candace, who's tuning in, is who are some of the biggest higher ed or education in general advocates in Congress?
Boy, that's a good question. I think there's, when you look at some of the congressional leaders, any member of that's on the House Education Committee or the Senate Education Committee tends to be someone that have stepped up and really expressed their interest in participating and being part of that conversation. Certainly, when you think about some of the power players, Lamar Alexander is probably the biggest power player over the last many years on issues related to education and higher education. And so, I would say if he's your congressperson, that you should be reaching out to him regularly because I think he's somebody that NACAC would like to influence a little bit more to understand what our priorities are. And then, I think when we look at some of the newer members of the Congress that have just sort of been elected in 2018, I think what we're seeing is a wave of people that understand that there are some grassroots issues that need to be addressed, and education is one of them. So certainly, and I'm terrible with names. This is my biggest curse. How I ended up as an admissions professional, as a person that can't remember names or can't pronounce names, it's really bad. So if I butcher names, I apologize. But I think, when you look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's certainly somebody that I think is going to be a big voice for education moving forward. So there's a lot of people, but start with the people that are on the education committees. Those are the people with the loudest voices and the people that are really involved in the crafting of the legislation that ultimately is acted upon by the remainder of Congress.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim. I know that can be sort of a tough question to answer on the fly, so thank you so much for that. Just a couple other names that I would add to that list. So as Jim mentioned, Lamar Alexander, he is the chairman of the Senate Education Committee. He is a senator for Tennessee. So any folks from Tennessee who are tuning in, your voices is super valuable there as a constituent of Senator Alexander's. The ranking member of the Senate Education Committee is Senator Murray from Washington. So any Washington state members who are tuning in. And then over on the House side,
I find Patty Murray to be an amazing advocate for particularly higher education and higher education access. She really, I think, has led the way, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years when there's been some contention about where education should be going. And in particular, I think she's been an outspoken critic of some of the bad actors in higher education, particularly in the for-profit sector. And so she's always somebody to pay attention to.
Absolutely, yeah. And then over on the House side, the leaders of the House Education Committee are Representative Scott, who is a representative here in Virginia, and Representative Fox, who represents North Carolina. So any folks tuning in from there, your voices as well, I mean, everyone's voices obviously are very critical, but as constituents of the leaders for those committees, we hope that you'll join in on the conversation and advocacy efforts. So another question that we have, Jim, is here from Chris. Chris is wondering, what will be NACAC's priorities at Hill Day this year?
There's a few things that we're talking about that was sort of discussed earlier. Certainly issues related to DACA and immigration and the status of undocumented students in the U.S. and how we treat them and what resources we provide to them is going to be big. Again, discussions of the Higher Education Reauthorization Act and where things are currently in those discussions, what that might look like, and obviously speaking about the importance of funding priorities that are important to NACAC, prioritizing funding for school counselors and school counselor education and school counselor resources. I think one of the areas where NACAC has obviously taken a major leadership is educating members of Congress about the severe lack of school counselors, particularly in a number of secondary and primary school settings in certain states. I think across the board, we don't have enough school counselors in schools because of budget cuts, particularly since 2008. But there are some states that are worse than others. And so it's important to have those conversations. I know when I've gone in and spoken with my representatives from Rhode Island, they've even been struck, and Rhode Island's actually a state that's not terrible in this regard, but they've certainly been struck by the gaps between sort of what's a recommended counselor load and what's the actual counselor load in many states. And so making sure that Congress understands the need for investment there, I think continues to be a critical priority for the association. We also are obviously concerned about federal financial aid. Any discussions of cuts to federal aid need to be off the table. As a matter of fact, that we need more federal financial aid. We need an increase in the Pell Grant. We need to either reinstitute SEOG or we need to roll what was SEOG funding into Pell, which is not what happened when SEOG was taken off the table. And so that certainly is going to be a big concern for us. And then, of course, international students become a real problem when we, sorry, my other phone's going off.
Popular guy.
International students and some of the issues that schools are dealing with in terms of visas, in terms of recruitment practices. Both of those issues are very, very big and having a huge impact on higher education. I know, just in the last week, I've been working with a student, not me, but my director of international recruitment has been working with a student from Nigeria who would have been very good fit for education in the U.S. and she couldn't get through the visa process. And historically, she would have been able to get through the visa process. And so changes that have taken place at the State Department level associated with screening for students coming into the U.S., concerns about what might happen going forward with students from China, with students in other countries in the Far East, all of that are critical importance to the association. And then last but certainly not least, we've addressed it as an association before, but we need to continue to address this issue of school safety and what is going to be the role of government in that. Where should we be investing our resources with that? I think we as an association would agree mostly that putting firearms in a school is not necessarily the best pathway to provide greater security for our students, that there are other resources, and here is important for, again, more school counselor resources. School counselors are on the front lines of working with students and knowing their issues and knowing their concerns, and more than likely, if a student was in some sort of psychological distress where they might pose a risk to a community, it's pretty likely a school counselor would identify that before anybody. And so if we don't have enough school counselors in schools, then we're not doing the right thing in terms of protecting our students and making sure that our students are getting the support that they need to not only be successful, but to be healthy and safe.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, just to add to that, on NACAC's legislative website, you can learn more about NACAC's policy priorities and the priorities that we advocate for on behalf of counselors and students. You can also see letters that we've signed on to as part of coalitions that we're members of that cover the wide variety of policy priorities that Jim gave a great synopsis of. So thank you so much for that, Jim. So our next question is from Valerie. Valerie is curious, does NACAC have a position on free college versus free 1 to 2 year programs, or is our position simply related to increasing Pell Grants or need-based financial aid?
Right now, the association has advocated for more financial aid dollars in the process and more resources for all students. The association has not taken a position on free college. It is certainly a topic that has arisen in some of the conversations within the Government Relations Committee. I'm sure that the board has been talking about it as well. But as of right now, we have not really sort of made a decision on whether the association should take a position, whether it's really within our charge, and if it's determined that it is an area that we should take a position on, what that position might be. Obviously, we believe strongly in the importance of access to higher education for students, but what is necessarily the best way to do that, to serve all students, that's still up in the air. And we're, as an association, in the government relations piece of it, we tend to weigh in more on policy proposals that are on the table than necessarily pushing policies that we want to see enacted. Some of that is part of the conversation, but ultimately it's up to legislators to bring legislation to the table, and it's up to us to advocate for or against that based on the priorities of NACAC.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're always curious to hear from members who may have a strong feeling one way or the other about a certain policy issue or things like that. So if you do have a strong opinion about free college or another sort of movement in the education world, definitely share that with me, with Mike, with our general legislative email, which I believe is somewhere there in the comments. So thank you for that response, Jim. Our next question is from Christy. Christy is curious, what is the best advice you have for a first-time attendee of NACAC's advocacy meeting?
Oh, that's a good question. I think first of all, don't be afraid. Come in feeling as if you belong there, because you do. I think, I mentioned earlier, me going to my first meeting, I was sort of going at it and going, what am I doing here? Do I belong here? Does my voice matter? Should I say anything, or should I just sort of sit back and absorb it all and sort of turtle, which is sometimes I'm a closet introvert, and so sometimes it's harder for me to kind of step front and make my voice known. I tend to sit back a little bit and absorb, and then sometimes express my opinion. So I would say come ready to express your opinion. Know that you're going to be in a room full of people that want to hear your opinion. And particularly if, frankly, you have a different opinion than what you're hearing. Don't be afraid to share what that opinion is, because I think now more than ever, we need people to have intelligent, reasoned conversation around issues so that we come out with good solutions on the back end. And if we just find ourselves in an echo chamber of everybody just agreeing, while that's easier, I don't necessarily personally believe that that is in the best interest of coming out with good solutions or good opinions or good stances on the issues. And so having the hard conversations is really important. So come ready and willing to have those hard conversations. Also come ready and willing to ask questions. There's going to be some speakers there, and I don't think we've solidified the lineup yet, so I don't want to speak exactly to who's going to be there, but there's going to be speakers there that are going to be saying some things that might be a little bit confusing. And so don't think that you know, if you don't raise your hand and say, ask the question, that, you know, you're going to look foolish. I always say to people, you know, chances are if you have a question, a lot of other people have the question too, and they're afraid to ask it. So ask it. You know, I often, you know, use the example on the college side. Some of us are really used to this concept of discount rate. And so discount rate gets thrown around in all sorts of meetings, and young admissions people have a tendency to walk into those meetings and think, oh, I'm supposed to know what this is. And so they don't say anything that they don't know it. And so I try in a lot of settings to make sure I clarify that, particularly when I'm in a setting where I don't know if somebody knows the answer to that. But that's not always going to happen. And so it's good to get clarity on anything that you're not understanding, or that you know, have some concerns about a direction that things are going in. Raise your voice. That's the purpose of this conference, is to teach us all that we have a voice, and it's important to raise that voice and use that voice in the process, because that makes the collective stronger.
Definitely. And I'll also just add, we do have a session during Advocacy Day designed specifically for first-time attendees to help answer some of those questions, work out some of those jitters. So definitely would encourage those of us who will be joining us for the first time at NACAC's Advocacy Meeting to join for that session. With that, I think that, let me also add, as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, on February 13th, same time, same place here on Facebook Live at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be hosting a similar Facebook question and answer with Allison Tom, who is a member of our Government Relations Committee. And during that, we'll actually be diving a little bit deeper into what will take place at the advocacy meeting, giving some in-depth advice to first-time attendees. So we really hope that you all will join us on February 13th at noon here on Facebook Live to chat with Allison.
And she's much more articulate than I am, so don't use this as your level of judging about how effective that will be. That would be a better presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. I think that's all we have. Thank you to those of you who have tuned in, and we'll look forward to seeing you on our next Facebook Live.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for joining. I think we got more people probably than we expected, and more good questions than we expected. You know, as a Government Relations Committee, we're here to serve you as members of the association. So, you know, don't be afraid to forward your opinions, forward your concerns, because we want to make sure that the discussions are ongoing, and that we as an association can continue to advocate for the good work that our members do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Stay warm. Bye-bye.
Take care.